Welcome to episode 17 of It's About Data, the podcast about data, analytics, AI, and whatever else we feel like talking about. Your hosts are Tony Baer of DB Insights and Matt Housley of Halfpipe Systems. This episode is brought to you by the number 4.2 trillion, the number of dollars of market capitalization that Nvidia hit earlier this week. All right, Tony, this time we're talking about the first company in the world to hit a $4 trillion market cap, which this happened on Tuesday, July 15th to Nvidia. It's been the darling of the stock market during this Gen AI boom for the last couple of years since late 2022. And there was a big piece of news that was announced that kind of pushed them over the edge, which is Jensen Huang was in Beijing to give a talk, and he basically announced that some of the export controls that had been on Nvidia GPUs for sales to China, specifically PRC, were being lifted. And this year, basically, their sales had taken a hit because in April, extra export controls were put on these GPUs. So basically, the current generation, their best GPUs are the Hopper series. Those are not allowed for sales in China. And so NVIDIA had developed a specialized GPU, the H2O, which was a slightly reduced capability processor that was for sale in China. Those were banned for sale in China in April. And so basically, NVIDIA had taken a big sales hit, and now that those controls are supposed to be lifted. Now, I think we're still waiting for an official announcement from the administration that the sales could go ahead, but presumably Jensen wouldn't have announced it had he not gotten pretty good confirmation for what was going on.
Yeah. I mean, put it this way. I mean, NVIDIA is, we used to talk about the Magnificent Seven.
Right.
I think we now talk about the Magnificent NVIDIA.
Basically. Yeah, they've become so dominant. I mean, they've just passed all the other FANG companies, Silicon Valley, heavy-duty players.
Well, the key is their mode is so, at least at this point, is so defensible. And I wrote a piece basically maybe about a year ago, which is asking, which posed the question: is NVIDIA the new AI mainframe? Because it's not just chips. I mean, it started with CUDA, which was actually Wall Street really did not particularly like that back in like 2006 because. My God, are you going to cannibalize your gaming business? Because it required also totally re-architecting their whole, their chip architecture as well.
Yep.
But the fact is that through those libraries, which are essentially a way to optimize very low-level functions.
Exactly. At the time, they called it GPU, which is general purpose GPU. So you can start using these really intense floating point computations to do very different work, not just gaming. And as I recall at the time, back then in 2006 and 2007, they were talking about things like geological modeling to search for oil deposits and, physics simulations. I don't know when people first started talking about AI for CUDA.
I think that happened. There was and I would have to pull up my post on that, but there was like a competition which involved the AI, I think, back around the 2012 timeframe, and that's I think where there was the first real proof point. But more to the point, what I was leading to is that this provided the software hooks because yes, you could develop without these libraries, but this gave as a developer, it gave you such a shortcut. You didn't have to worry about the plumbing. And the result is that it's almost like a quasi operating system. It kind of locked a lot of developers in because to write for another chip would require dealing with different libraries and running your software differently, or at least require an abstraction layer. And the problem is that abstraction layers are good in certain things or fine for certain things, but we're dealing with extreme compute requirements for neural networks that basically that blossomed into generative AI. You want to basically get rid of whatever you want to simplify as much as possible. And so an abstraction layer is not going to be your friend. And so they built, since then, they up to the point where they now have like entire, kind of compute systems that are hosted. I mean, the DGX cloud that is hosted in each of the in each of the hyperscalers. And from that standpoint, the only other company that's actually matched Nvidia in terms of having their infrastructure in the cloud. We've talked about this as Oracle, so it's
Yeah.
very unusual. But the thing is, they have such a hold. Um, my take on this is that, or my question on this, of course, I think it's everybody's question, is like, how long can this party go on? Now, I don't
Yeah.
think it's time to short Nvidia anytime soon, but I'm thinking more from the stand. And again, they do have such, they do have, such stickiness, with the, with the developer base, but I think there's some physical limitations, which is that the
Yeah.
availability of power, the availability of
Absolutely. Yep.
water,
Yeah.
and the fact is that, I mean, it's gotten to the point that, for instance, Microsoft is reactivating, the working, the last working, I guess, part of 3 Mile Island. Well, there are not that many, decommissioned nuclear plants that can readily be, go back online.
Yeah.
Um,
And we talked
and
about this before, but like electric cars did not push them to recommission nuclear power plants. Bitcoin, a notoriously power hungry
Yeah,
system, did not push them to recommission nuclear power plants.
yeah. So to me, one question of all this is basically how long can this party go on? The other
Yeah.
thing is
Yeah.
also, and yes, the cost of inference is going down,
Yeah.
and I've seen stats that cost of training is going down. But I think in the long run, this is, gets into my open AI, rant really more than
Yeah.
Nvidia, is that I don't think large models in the long run are sustainable. Yes, you will need a few as literally foundation models, but I think the bulk of the bulk of basically of I guess the real value add, I think it's going to happen much more with, with more contained, say, like domain language models, or small language models, and they may not be even language. It might be like, molecular models, for instance, like for drug discovery, or GIS models when when you're doing a, prospecting, for oil, or whatever. But I think we're going to be seeing more. I think sort of models that are going to be, that are going to have more, let's say, constraints around them, or more or more borders around them, and so therefore, like, even if Nvidia, and what's interesting about all this is, of course, Nvidia is not a manufacturer. They contract manufacture everything, and they're
To
still valuable like
TSMC.
crazy.
Yep.
But the fact is, so even if they got the CSMCs to build out infinite capacity for manufacturing, which is also another water and power, resource hog.
Yeah.
Um, uh, the fact is, can ultimately enterprises, afford the cost of doing all this, or are they going to start to look for instance, some types of jobs that could be done on CPUs?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's really important to think about when you look at a market cap like this, it seems like a very abstract thing, $4 trillion. That's $4 trillion that's sitting on balance sheets. It's sitting in people's retirement accounts. It's sitting in index funds. And at some point, people might start to want some of that money back, especially if it looks like
Yeah,
we're exiting this cycle to some extent.
I
And that
don't
means
think it's going
selling.
to happen for a little while yet. I
Yeah.
mean, the thing
Yeah.
is, but I'm just looking just more long term in terms of limitations
Yeah.
that, that we could have.
I agree. And another big shift. So you talked about CUDA, and my understanding from talking to machine learning engineers is that CUDA is especially critical for training. It's actually not as critical for inference. And that's where, well, so first of all, the amount of money that's flowing into AI is slowly shifting toward inference and away from training, along the lines of what you were saying. And partially that's just
Yeah,
scaling up user numbers, scaling up applications. You should be able to take that initially training and use it more and more and get more efficiency out of it. But what that means is that's a big risk for NVIDIA, because that means that companies may start shifting to Google TPUs or AMD GPUs, which are supposedly very good for inference. The pain point so far has been that ML engineers didn't want to spend the time to refactor to do inference on a
yeah,
different chip. But the numbers, the costs of this hardware are so expensive that this
right,
is one of the obvious ways to actually apply, FinOps and start saving money, like a
right.
lot of money by going to different GPUs. I think another interesting thing is that what is it? The H100 is NVIDIA's latest GPU, and in some sense, they're kind of, it's the everything in the kitchen sink approach, right? So it has specialized cores for inference, but it also has all the training cores. And it's like, well, at some point, why don't we separate those so that you can sell much cheaper hardware that is just designed for inference? And Google, again, is a leader in the space with their TPUs, but they're mostly, my understanding is that the TPUs are most popular for internal Google applications and not for external users at
Well,
this point.
AWS has already beaten you to the punch there because they have
Yeah.
Trainium and Inferentia.
Yeah. Yeah. And I need to read up and see where they're positioned, kind of what their market positioning is versus Google that has had TPUs for, I don't know, almost a
Yeah.
decade or something like this. Yeah.
Well, the other thing that what I would say is that just the changing mix of workloads is
Yeah.
not necessary. It's a logical development because it's like you can it's like training is essentially the manufacturing process,
Yeah. Exactly.
and inference is the consumption process.
Yeah.
You're training a model so it can be consumed. So the thing is, if we're in a world where basically 90% is training and 10% is consumption, there's something seriously wrong with the economics. So I mean, ultimately,
Yeah.
the bulk of, I mean, for AI to be sustainable, and to be basically a profitable business, for whoever, for the hyperscales or whoever is running the models. It's got to be in the consumption.
Yeah.
Ultimately where, because that's where the value is. I mean, training is just a means to an end. It's an important step, but training is not the step that creates the value.
Right. Exactly. And there's been such a rush to train new models with more and more parameters over the last 2 years, and that just can't last forever. I think OpenAI has taken that to a real extreme and almost created a business model of like trying to boost their valuation simply by spending as much money as possible. But even OpenAI at some point has to start thinking about how, like, to be a bit more efficient how they do inference, which may at some point either mean pushing Nvidia to make specialized inference hardware or going to other players such as Amazon or TPUs or other things like this.
Well,
Yeah.
OpenAI is a whole other issue,
Yeah.
and I actually am very. I mean, I'm actually fairly. I mean, I think that Nvidia can adapt. I'm not sure OpenAI can. I mean, their whole culture.
Yeah.
Um, I tend to see OpenAI as being WeWork 2.0, in terms of that they're looking at as you're saying, is that part of their way of buying market share is by literally is by literally doing ginormous capital investments, so they create essentially the perception that they're too big to fail, and but I just don't see how their investments are going to play out, because they're not today. I mean, their the revenue side is not growing, concomitant with their capital spending plans.
Right, right. And there's just not this FinOps focus. In other words, they tend to talk about how valuable they're going to be again based on how much money they're spending. And it's like, wait. We need to start thinking about how we're going to be more efficient and save money if we're ever going to get to profitability within the next decade or before you go bankrupt.
Well, put it this way,
Yeah,
and to play devil's advocate, you could
yeah,
have made the same argument with Amazon.com
right,
back during initially the .com years, and that Bezos kept bragging about how much money he was losing,
right.
um, but the thing is, it's not the same resource. To me, the big limitation is physical. It's resources.
Yeah, yeah,
That was not the limitation on Amazon.com expanding its retail footprint. It has other impacts, no question about that. But not it's not the fact that Amazon is drawn so much business. Oh yes, okay, maybe there is more energy spent in terms of doing daily deliveries and that type of thing. But on the other hand, it's not to anywhere near the scale that
yeah,
these AI data centers require, and for what OpenAI is trying to pull off.
yeah.
And the other thing also is that the good news about Amazon is they by the way found another business that actually delivered the real margins, which is AWS.
Yeah, that's right. And they also, I mean, I think Bezos was also very sensitive to shareholder concerns, getting that message out there that they were growing the
Yeah,
company. But as there was more shareholder pressure, they actually switched, they shifted to being profitable very quickly. And I think he kind of said that all along, like, especially as you got into the 2010s, that they were in a position to be profitable. They just wanted to take the foot off the gas a bit. And they
right,
did that, right, at some point. And it's not so clear that OpenAI is anywhere near being able to
exactly.
take their foot off the gas without, I don't know what the metaphor here is, but basically without the
So,
car exploding.
so Matt, I'll ask you one final
Yeah,
question:
yeah.
Is this 4 trillion valuation of Nvidia sustainable?
Well, I'm going to just throw out at the end here, almost as a question. Notice that Jensen Huang is selling not a huge number of shares, but he's in the process over time of a 6 million share sell off plan out of his 800 million shares. So it's a small slice, but usually when insiders are selling, it indicates that they're hedging their bets, basically. It kind of means, well, this company could keep going up, but maybe it's not going to keep going up. Because if you're not hedging your bets, you just borrow against your shares. And I don't
Right.
know if Zuckerberg has Zuckerberg ever sold shares. I think some of these founders have never really sold any shares because they just keep borrowing against their shares, which is a tax dodge. But it's also like saying, hey, borrow because the shares are going to go up. Like, why would I ever sell? And so this is an interesting move. Interestingly, also, Tim Cook is selling some shares of Apple and Bezos is selling some shares of Amazon. And so it seems like a lot of billionaires are starting to hedge their bets on the overall state of the tech ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
All right.
well, when we get off here, I'll call my broker. I think I'll
gotta
my
gotta
financial
close out.
advisor.
Got to close out that $1 billion position.
No, we are not. By the way, we need to put a disclaimer here. We are not dispensing any financial advice to
No,
anybody.
absolutely not.
Oh no.
Absolutely
Oh
not.
no.
No, 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 no. That is not our job.
Okay, we're
Just
safe.
buyer beware. That's all we'll say. Buyer beware with any move you're going to be make in the near
Sounds good.
future.
Okay, with that notice, I'm going to the beach.
Okay, sounds good. Have fun. Take care.
Talk to you later.